All right, with that, welcome back to another episode of OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where I'm Adam Armbrecht, also covering the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy Doug Norrie, joined as always by my co-host Andy Mackiewicz, the healthy, wealthy, and wise season generational ticket holder. But Andy, hold the introduction because we're also joined by familiar to every Giants fan, so it's not like it's going to be someone we need to give a lengthy introduction for, but Justin Penik, talking Giants, also with Jomboy Media. How are you, sir, man? Thank you for coming in and making time. This is the off season to talk New York Football Giants.
Andy, Adam, thank you so much for having me on. I was talking with Andy in a Twitter space that I was doing a couple weeks ago, and loved the idea of the space. It was a Twitter space that lasted as long as a cigar. So Andy came in and said, "Yeah, I have a podcast, and I'm a little bit more of I have the fan mindset, and my co-host Adam is a little bit more of that analytical mindset." So I'm like, these are my guys, because I feel like the show Talking Giants that I do, I feel like Bobby and I kind of have a similar dynamic as well. So I'm excited to be here talking Giants. No pun intended, and let's do it. This is a really fun offseason to kind of really talk about them. 9 picks coming up in just about 9-10 days is the NFL draft. So I'm excited to be here.
That's as we say, Andy, 10 days away from the NFL draft. Save your cigar questions for the back end, Andy, because I have a lot of questions, not being a cigar guy. How long are they supposed to last? Do better cigars burn slower? There's a whole myriad of things we could get into. Yeah, but Andy, when we look at the top of the draft and talking with Justin here, we've rattled around so many different possibilities. I want to get Justin's take on 5 and 7. What is the ideal scenario for you right now before Andy gives, I think, what we call some caveats and some stipulations around who the Giants could potentially draft? But do you have the optimal moves for the Giants at 5 and 7 when the draft comes up?
I mean, for me, it's simple right now. A tackle at 5. I'm fine with Aquanu or Neal. I think I lean that Neal's just a little bit better, a more complete player. I tend to prioritize pass protection a little bit more than being a run blocker, and I think Neal is definitely a better pass protector than Aquanu, but Aquanu can definitely develop into that, right? So I'm fine with either or at 5, and then or let's just say I'm fine with either or no matter where they come, and then also I do prefer Kayvon Thibodeau. Now, we'll talk about this. We may go back and forth about it, but I am of that analytical mindset of secondary is king, but also it's that other end of the spectrum of the Giants haven't had that elite pass rusher, number one. Number two, you see how teams get to the playoffs by, stopping the explosive play, and everything gets tougher in the playoffs, but you also see teams that they really win with pass rush in the playoffs. And you see the teams with really, really good pass rush you've seen the last 2 years, the Bucks, and then this past year with the Rams, which just an elite defensive line, those front 4, front 5 guys. So I'm leaning Thibodeau right now over Sauce would be my third option. But if we're walking away with the tackle and we pick that guy at 5, I am taking a huge breath, a huge sigh of relief. And then 7, if we're able to pull out a Thibodeau or a Sauce, I'm also very, very happy with that.
Andy, go with so add in your caveat around the top of the draft here, because we talked about this before, and Justin mentioned secondary. We know we think we're going to need to. We'll touch on James Bradberry on the back end of this episode. We know what needs to get accomplished here, but you have some very strict guidelines to what cannot happen at the top of the draft as well.
Well, this is kind of the reason why we end up chatting, Justin, is more around the Twitter space that you had. People were talking about safety and the secondary. To your point of how much of a need it is, when you look at the Giants' depth chart right now, you basically see Xavier McKinney, Julian Love, and then there's just a bunch of white boxes that go across on the depth chart because the Giants don't have anyone.
They have 2 safeties on the roster,
which normally would.
And we debated, by the way, that one of them is actually a backup safety and more of a special teamer, but that's neither here nor there. It's neither here nor there.
Right. And so, when you look at that depth chart, you immediately think that Giants really need to address the safety position. But the thing that we ended up batting back and forth was in Wink Martindale's scheme and his system, safety really isn't as important as a cornerback or as an edge rusher or someone that can, give him a little bit more versatility in the scheme. So for me, I've been steadfast since day one, since Wink Martindale got hired, that Kyle Hamilton is on my do not draft list, even though he's a great player. I just can't find a scenario where I would be excited about getting Kyle Hamilton in the door.
Yeah, it also comes down to not only, hey, is it a fit, but also Kyle Hamilton. There's about maybe 5, 6, 7 players that I have above that I would prefer
Mhm.
drafting over Kyle Hamilton. Like Devin Lloyd is one of them. Jermaine Johnson is another guy. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of Charles Cross, I would rather be drafting Charles Cross instead of a guy like Kyle Hamilton if we have to, if we're in a position where both tackles are gone, right? So it's not even one of those, yes, where I do agree with you, where, hey, safety just isn't a fit for the Giants, not a fit for Wink Martindale. But also for how good Kyle Hamilton is, and he is good. He's no Sean Taylor, which a lot of people have been hyping him up like he is Sean Taylor. He's not. There's still a lot of other players that I would prefer the Giants to draft over him.
And then when you go down the draft too, we'll get into some of these other picks. You look at the crop of safeties. There's a lot of talent in the second, third, and fourth rounds that I think you can pull one of those players in, especially inside a Wink system, and say, yeah, we're going to feel pretty good about developing this talent over the next year. But you mentioned a name in there, so I'm going to run with this theme. The Giants come up, they have 5 and 7. When the Giants come up on the board at 5 and there's multiple offensive linemen available there, you would think or assume that Thibodeau's probably gone at that point. Maybe Gardner's already been selected potentially. But if you see this opportunity now at 5 to say, and maybe it does come down to, because you mentioned Neal and Ekwonu leaving Cross as maybe that secondary choice out of that group, as long as, say, Ekwonu, I guess all three would have to be available for this to make sense because teams would want to take those two players above Cross. If they're all there, though, and you can trade out of 5 and still know, worst case scenario, I'm getting Ekwonu. Maybe I'm ending up with Neal because some teams look at him the way they looked at Andrew Thomas, which I think benefited the Giants in the long run when he fell a little bit in his draft class. Does that make the trade down opportunity a likely scenario for you? Because I think that Joe Shane ultimately and the Giants do want to accomplish that if they can at the top of this draft. Get that first round draft pick for next year, or even just more assets this year. There's so many holes when you look across this roster. It cannot hurt to say, now I have even more valuable pieces here throughout this draft and maybe next year if that's the way it goes.
I go back and forth with the wishy-washy opinion of why trading back is beneficial. And like, why are you going to trade back? Are you going to trade back to get that first rounder for next year? Because I really hope the Giants aren't a 4-win football team this year. Like, I'm not expecting a playoff run. I'm not expecting to make the playoffs, but let's all stop acting like it's unreasonable for the Giants to be better than the 5th overall pick in the NFL draft next year. Like, things should be better, right? So I go back and forth. Is it worth it if we have the 10th pick? Do we want that extra first round pick so we could possibly trade up if we're going to be in the market for a quarterback? Or because the Giants have so many needs and holes right now, do you want to add another second, third rounder? Because there are just so many good players in this draft. So I go back and forth on it, but I guess the main question is trading back, do I feel better that one of those top players is still going to be there? I don't like when you're trading back. I don't think that's the first thing that you really, is it the first thing that you think of? Like, what were we thinking of draft night last year? Were we thinking about adding those picks and getting excited about that? And whoa, Dave Gettleman traded back? Or were people thinking and screaming in the moment, we just passed on a guy like Slater and Parsons?
Because you got two guys here that were doing that.
Exactly. Because now when you think about it in hindsight, we have the extra first round pick, which is huge, and we got Kadarius Toney. But if you said, is Rashawn Slater a generational offensive tackle worth Kadarius Toney in the 7th pick? It's like, which would you rather have at this point in time? Like, even looking back in hindsight, I probably would just take the generational offensive tackle and move on with my day, right?
I still think the Giants have an opportunity to get both a Slater and Parsons. Like, and that would be the win right there, where it's like, that's why you trade back. And that's why you add the extra first round pick the next year. Now, obviously the Giants being so bad last year was not part of the plan, that they would hold the 5th overall pick and the Bears would hold the 7th overall pick. The plan was the Bears to be bad, not the Giants. But ideally you win the trade back if you can not just get one of those players, but if you can get 2 of those players that you're mad that you passed on the year before. And that is what I'm hoping night one, we can kind of look back on that trade, without the players obviously putting on a uniform first, but we can look back on that trade, at least for right now, and say, you want to know what? We'll take that. And even if that's not a pass rusher like Micah Parsons is, hey, if it's a Sauce Gardner, if it's a Jermaine Johnson, it's like, hey, these are 2 football players when we're kind of bickering about which one football player. And also the thing with Slater, not to get too deep into this, but the thing with Slater is that, he's like a really, really good all-pro, high-quality left tackle. The Giants already have their left tackle, and that position is a lot more valuable than right tackle. So that's also the thing you have to think about with him too. But we're not talking about last year.
Well, so in that vein, though, of getting them, of maximizing the value, you mentioned Devin Lloyd, and we talked about him in our linebacker group last time. And this is really where Andy and I painted the trade down scenario of saying, well, if you can get back into those teens and still end up grabbing Devin Lloyd, like once we looked at the position group and realized, oh yeah, that's another one that's pretty much bare here. And even in the short term is bare, in the long term could be even more desperate, because where's Blake Martinez really going to fit in the grand scheme of things on the big picture? So how high, just a quick one, is how high is too high to take Devin Lloyd? And do you have to trade down from 5 and 7 in order to make that a feasible or realistic decision, just because of where the talent pool would be at 7, let's assume, obviously? And are you maybe looking, what if you trade down with Seattle? Is 9 too high to take them? Or do you try to get to 13, 14? We know 17 and 18 have been thrown out there, but by that point, I think Devin Lloyd could very realistically be gone. I think Nakobe Dean could probably be gone potentially by that spot too. So what is the delicate dance you're trying to do of going value, more assets, and not missing out on whatever that cutoff is for the top tier talent of the draft versus filling needs as you move along?
Lloyd is on like my quote unquote, my board of players, my preferences of players that I would be like okay with at 7. And I say okay, not like in a like a loving, like I'm okay with you. I say okay, be like, yeah, I feel like we settled, and the Giants may have to do that. And that's it's kind of a sucky scenario where if the first 4 picks fall in a certain way and nobody wants to trade up, because nobody, like, hey, I'm going to stand pat and I'm going to believe that I'm going to get my Kenny Pickett. I'm going to believe that I'm going to get, my Corral, my Ritter, where I feel like I don't need to move up because teams aren't really desperate for quarterbacks because they don't want the quarterbacks in this draft. So I'm hoping that that's not the scenario that we're in night one. That's one that I'm very worried about. That I feel like we're going to be settling at 7, and hopefully we get the tackle at 5, right? But Devin Lloyd is on that list of guys that I would be okay with. And I'm okay with reaching for a player a little bit if we do trade down, because then you're getting more picks out of it, right? You're adding more picks and you're adding more value to that pick. So if you want to reach for a player that you really like with that trade down, let's just say it's at 9, I'm definitely okay with that. I would add Devin Lloyd, like where my brain goes if we trade down. Devin Lloyd, Daxton Hill, Jermaine Johnson, and then Kenyon Green and Zion Johnson. Those 5 players, if we trade down, I'm really excited about the possibility of landing one of those guys, and that will be slamming my fist on the table. We better get one of those guys, and especially I lean a little bit more towards Zion Johnson and Kenyon Green.
Daxton Hill is an interesting one when you go inside that transitional cornerback to safety, and and who else is possible there. I will quickly say, this is the thing about at the top of the draft, top 15, where I always go, if you like a guy and understanding you have needs, there's talent on the board, that best player scenario, available scenario. But man, it's like, if you like Devin Lloyd, you like Devin Lloyd. And you're not going to tell me that drafting him at 7 is somehow wrong relative to drafting him at 13. Like the player quality and the results, you're not going to look back 5 years from now and go, yeah, but you really should have traded down from 7 there, because what could have happened, right? I think at some point you have to work the delicate balance of, don't be Dave Gettleman going, well, the best player available is a gold jacket wearing running back. Yes, that's where you're making a mistake in terms of the value and where you're in the draft. But when you're at 9 to 15 and those types of ranges in the top 20, I think if you think the guy fits your needs and can be someone that you're going to plug and play for the next 5 to 7 years, you go with it, and you really don't hesitate to look back on it. But go ahead, Andy.
Oh, well, what I was going to say is, Justin, you and I have great minds think alike, because I've been talking up Devin Lloyd as much as humanly possible on this. And while, he's a tremendous football player, and he's one that if the Giants drafted him at 7, like you said, it feels high, but right after the draft, I'd be super excited that he was on the roster. So like it would change very quickly for me. So I talked about Kyle Hamilton being the guy that's just on my do not draft list, just outside of like fit and scheme and all that other stuff. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Like you said, I'd rather have Lloyd in 12 to 15 range. Is there anyone that you're looking at in the first, maybe even second round, that you're like, no matter what, I just hope this person doesn't fall to the Giants and force them to take him?
I'm hoping that he doesn't fall.
Like, who do you not want the Giants to take is basically...
I guess the first guy that comes to mind, besides, hey, Charles Cross at 7 is 5 or 7 is not somebody I hope the Giants take.
That's the girl off the bleachers at the prom. She's not getting asked to dance, and you go, Well, all right. I'll take it for one number here, but you'd really prefer to get the prom queen out there if you could.
Yeah, especially at tackle,
Yeah.
especially at tackle. But another guy is Linderbaum, who a lot of people really quickly fell in love with, and then I think as time has gone on, people are still like, he's still a very, very good football player, but I think his stock has dropped to the point where he should be talked about, and that is, I think, behind Kenyon Green and Zion Johnson, where before, I mean, before, when we started talking about the draft, it's a Tyler Linderbaum, 5 or 7. It's worth it for the center. It's like, no, you look at how light he is, and it's not even just how light he is, but there are legit play strength questions. A guy that I would kind of be down for at 36 possibly, but I think he'll last a little bit longer is Leo Chanel. Leo Chanel, interior linebacker from Wisconsin. He is strong as hell. And you see those times where he's lining up as an 8-gap blitzer against Tyler Linderbaum. He beats his ass. Like he kicks his ass, off the line of scrimmage and at the point of attack. So Linderbaum has some strength questions. And, I think in the NFL, if you're not going to be running this outside zone scheme like the 49ers did, or, like the 49ers do, or like the Cleveland Browns do, how much do you really need like a pure athlete in your interior spots, or really at the offensive line at all? Like, how often are you going to be seeing guys running 40 yards down the field, driving guys down the field? Like, seeing those highlights on Twitter sometimes makes me cringe. It's like, yeah, that's great. It's fun. It's a really fun play, but how often is that going to be happening at the NFL? The only time you see an offensive lineman running 40 yards down the field is when you have an explosive play that ends up at a touchdown, which the Giants, rarely ever have. So that's the thing with Linderbaum, where a lot of people are in love with him. A lot of people are infatuated with him. PFF calls him like the best prospect ever. And I think in the NFL, I'd rather have that guy that's strong as an ox, but maybe can't move as well. But it's important, especially for a quarterback like Daniel Jones that's had some questions about his pocket mobility and awareness. It's important for that interior part of the line so that pocket does not collapse. You need those guys that are anchors and that are strong. And if the Giants aren't running that outside zone scheme, which I think they will do a little bit more under Dable, but it's not going to be a full-fledged 49ers Cleveland Browns effort. So I don't think Linderbaum is a fit.
Yeah, it's funny too, because relative to saying it's like the experience with Will Hernandez and going, well, you want some athleticism because this guy is, the human fridge box that could never quite seemingly get to the places you needed him to be. Yeah. But a guard is also drastically different than center. And to your point, man, top of the second round, I saw this over, just fans have been discussing it. Oh, well, if now you can get Linderbaum in the top of the second round, I think to your point, I go, yeah, and I probably still wait. And it's the combination of what else do I need to fill here? You're not going to convince me. Whatever your feeling is on Feliciano and it being a stopgap option here, that's fine. Because guess what? X number of positions on this roster are going to need to be filled by stopgaps until you can get into next year's draft and next year's free agency class. So I tend to agree with you in that regard. When I look at you mentioned a couple of the guards there. Are you committed? No, you say committed, but I almost pushed a little bit of a pause button on how high I would look at the guard class. Now, I mean, if you tell me that Zion Johnson is falling to 36, I mean, I feel like that would be a fall for him. I can get really excited about that.
Him or Kenyon Green.
Yeah, exactly.
Him or Kenyon Green at 36, it is.
Like, you race to go get in there, yeah.
Pick up the phone and just do it, But I don't think either. I think there's a better chance that Kenyon Green could fall because of his combine, and maybe teams are a little bit more concerned about his testing. But and this is from Ralph Facciano, who seems to be a little bit more plugged in to whatever's going on inside the Giants building than some. I know Schwartz is pretty plugged in too sometimes. And I think a lot of these guys are maybe trying to feel out the new regime, but definitely they have ownership ties. And, whatever's going on in Mara's office, whatever leaks happen from there, I feel like those two guys kind of pick it up. And Fasciano came out with a little bit of a report, and this was a little while ago. Who knows how things have changed, that the Giants really want to walk away with 2 offensive linemen from the top 100 picks, which, yes, like I think fans should definitely expect that. I think also us fans should kind of want that, like prioritize the offensive line. And you aren't pigeonholed by taking an offensive lineman, like let's say at the third round. I think that 67, 81 picks, I think one of them is going to be, and I think it should be an offensive lineman, because if Kenny Green, Zion Johnson aren't there at 36, then take a really good football player. Like just take a good football player. If it's a wide receiver that's going to be available, like a Christian Watson, Traylon Burks, who knows if he's going to fall right? Who knows? Take a really good football player. Arnold DBKD is another one. But I'm Cole Strange is arguably
that's what I was going to say. That
third best interior offensive lineman. Yeah.
That's where I mildly I'm ready to push the pause button at 36 and about being committed to taking maybe even a Kenyon Green, depending on what the board looks like, or a Zion Johnson. I'm willing to wait, knowing that a guy like Cole Strange is out there, knowing that a guy like Parham is going to be out there out of Memphis. Like, I think there's still this collection of players that you can go 67, 81 and still feel like we're going to get a guy that comes in here, and whether he's pushing the starter or just taking over immediately next year, like, we're going to have that solution in place. And that's also combined with what's available at the top. And we talked about second round 36, what's there. I'm curious. Go ahead, because I'm curious about, you had a very interesting premise about 36 and how high you're willing to take some positional value.
Okay, but first of all, the guard position, I'm really excited about talking about this because I've been on the hill for the last 3 years, holding the flag of Will Hernandez is not a great football player. Yeah. And it slowly started to show up to the point where, week 1, a year and a half ago, I'm like, can we please just move Andrew Thomas, like get him away from Andrew Thomas? If you look at anyone that struggled,
you're running a risk
at any of the tackle positions, it's because Will Hernandez was next to them at guard and no one ever talked about it. Think about, like, Andrew Thomas struggled right away, and then finally they moved Will Hernandez out and Shane Lemieux's there. And even though Shane Lemieux wasn't great, Andrew Thomas started becoming a better and better player. Look at this past year. Will Hernandez moved to the other side. Andrew Thomas looks like a great offensive tackle all of a sudden. So for me, could you picture a scenario where Kenyon Green or Zion Johnson falls to 36 and the Giants draft him and put him next to Andrew Thomas? Like, for me, that makes me so excited. I feel like we've been doing a disservice to Andrew Thomas, just putting turnstile guys next to him, and he's out on an island on left tackle trying to survive.
I think Lewinsky is a career one-side player, and I'm going to check this right now. I have PFF, and I'm going to check the snap counts, and because I do think this is a certain O-line detailed. Yeah, he's a career. I think he's a career right guard. And I think
he's a right guard.
Yeah. So, man,
and Andy just walked Justin right down into a sweet spot that he was already pretty committed to at 36. Now it's even stronger. Let's add on to this. Then you can respond to Andy, but also add in, if there's a trade down scenario and now the Giants have a couple more assets, are you willing to jump back into the back end of the first round to secure one of those two guards if you think they plug in, or is this again, I'll wait, and if it comes to me, fantastic, but it's not. This is not the push all in to secure that player.
No. The Giants have too many holes for you to be
diminishing the assets that you get by trading down.
Yeah. Now, here's also the wild thing, which I don't know if I fully believe this. I would hope that the Giants would be responsible enough to really utilize these 9 draft picks, especially the high end draft picks too. But are they going to be in like this financial situation where they're not going to be able to afford these draft picks, and that's why they're going to need to trade back at one of these spots, and maybe the return isn't that great. Yep. So that's also something that's in the back of my mind when talking about whether it's trading up, trading down, whatever. That, are they really in that bad of a financial situation where they're not going to be able to afford these 9 draft picks, which I really, really hope that they would find a way, because building through the draft is the best way you can grow your football team. So I would hope that they can find a way to do that. And it's rare that you have 5 top 100 picks. It's not even just 9 draft picks and they have, 3 6-rounders. It's 5 draft picks in the top 100. And, this draft really, it's not just, it can make or break Joe Schoen. It really is going to determine, how Joe Schoen's, I think, his regime and his time in New York is kind of go.
And it's difficult too, because if you look around the league and you see teams that didn't, quote, have any money, and then they go out and they make moves and they bring in guys and they get contracts on the books, like the Giants. Some teams are different. Some franchises are different. The flexibility financially is a little bit more real for some franchises as opposed to others. And seemingly, again, when your window is we're in rebuild mode versus trying to win championship mode, that also affects how you're willing to use those dollars. Before we get into, I think, what frees up money here ahead of or maybe on draft day for the Giants and a couple of key players, the 2 names I just want to touch on. David Ojabo, he's falling, obviously the injury. Does this give you any Azeez Ojulari vibes of the Giants maybe lucking into getting a much higher talent a little bit further back? I'm not painting the trade down from 36 scenario and still land him, but would 36 be too high to say, I know there's the injury, but this is a guy that was top 25 and probably pushing up ahead of that I feel like there's some level of stealing something here before I balance it out with another position of need that I think is low key important for the Giants.
It's tough because obviously we don't have access to any kind of medicals, and I'm not a doctor. But here's where I am with a Jabba when it comes to the Giants. The Giants are too bad of a football team to take a risk on somebody at 36, right? Where especially, hey, if you want to take a risk on a player that has upside and maybe is a little raw, sure, that's different than somebody who just tore their Achilles. And we saw with Lorenzo Carter, and we'll see what kind of player he looks like this year, because this will be the second year off the torn Achilles, right? But it took him 15, it took him like 14 weeks. And then after that, yeah, he looked like the best player. He looked like the best player of the NFL for a couple of weeks there. Exaggeration, but it took him a little while. And obviously you're not drafting a Jabba for year one. You're drafting these guys so they can kind of form up. But Jabba's a raw player to begin with, and he relies on his athleticism. So if you're taking away that part of his athleticism with a torn Achilles, then what do you have in a player like David Ojabo? Yep. If he was hey, he's definitely more of a technical player, then sure, let's take that chance. But Ojabo relies so much on his athleticism, and he's so raw in that regard. And then you include the torn Achilles, he's kind of undraftable in my book. But I really do like him, though. It's just tough that the Giants are so crappy of a team that they can't take a chance on a guy like that because there's just so many holes.
Yeah, Justin, you were, the way that you described that is perfect. It's like you could see him falling to the Rams in the second round, or the Chiefs, or someone that like can take a flyer on that type of guy. The Giants aren't afforded that luxury because they have holes everywhere on both sides of the ball. What I think is encouraging, I know Adam's going to mention a couple more players, but you talked about the 5 picks in the top 100-ish. When we start thinking about it, I'm going to steal some of Adam's analytics here, is when you talk about starters, those types of players that you draft in those top 100 picks should be starters basically from day one on these types of rosters. You're talking about turning over almost over 20% of the team that's starting from last year. Yeah. When you add in players like Lewinsky and Feliciano and others, you're talking about the Giants turning over a quarter of their roster. So for me, I'm just wondering to you, like, what does that mean for the Giants? You said you don't think that they're going to be a 4-win team this year. You're hoping that they're not going to be a 4-win team. Mm-hmm. But overhauling 25 to 30% of the lineup, like, where can the Giants go from here?
The expectation
nice
is
long
that
sigh. I like that. Really soak it in, Justin, before you come back for it.
The expectation on defense for me is similar to last year, where you want to aim to not give up explosive plays. And on the offensive side of the ball, you want to produce more explosive plays. It's really where it lies to me. Wink Martindale, besides 2020, has notoriously been known for preventing the explosive play, just like Patrick Graham. And that's why Patrick Graham was successful. But where Wink Martindale is more successful than Patrick Graham is he doesn't allow the big play, but he also gets after the quarterback. They also force turnovers. They also, they stop the run. They're great at stopping the run every single year. Whereas Patrick Graham prevented the explosive play and then sacrificed some other things, sacrificed the intermediate part of the field, sacrificed, allowing running plays. So the defense, you could be worried about the defense, especially what that secondary is going to look like, because depending on what that secondary looks like, it's going to match what the 2020 Ravens were. And when Wink Martindale has a bad secondary, then you see his defense kind of suffers. I don't think it's going to be that bad, though, because, they were really, really bad, the Ravens secondary, because they were just hurt.
Decimated.
Offense, though, that's what it's going to come down to. Can you produce more explosive plays? And if you produce more explosive plays, I think the rest of the offense is going to come. There's going to be less guys in the box. Teams are going to be playing less cover one against you. Where teams just have not respected with Jason Garrett, and especially Jason Garrett's offense, even though it was Freddie Kitchens calling the plays. It was still Garrett's offense. Teams just have not respected the Giants' ability to push the ball down the field. They didn't. So they would play cover one. They would play man coverage all over. You leave extra guys in the box, and Giants just couldn't. They couldn't do anything. And you saw. I actually really want to do a study on this. Whether it's the Giants or whether it's league round or league wide. I think it'll just be easier to do with the Giants. But I have a theory that producing explosive plays in a given drive, it actually makes your red zone efficiency a lot better. Why are those two things tied? Because when you produce a 20-plus yard play, when you get a 30-plus yard play, 40-plus yard play, you're flipping the field and you're flipping the schedule. where you're not putting so many plays on the game script like Jason Garrett liked to do with these 10, 11, 12 play drives. You're putting so many plays on the game script in that given drive where somebody eventually is going to have a holding call. Somebody's eventually going to have a dropped pass. Somebody's eventually going to allow a sack. It's just inevitable. It's just inevitable that something is going to go wrong in those long drives. So then you're going to get burnt out. I mean, you're going to get burnt out by the time you get to the red zone where you're going to almost just run out of plays. You've put so much on the script where you're going to run out. And that is where the Giants need to be different this year. And it's not going to be that difficult for them to be better than where they were last year. Now, we said the same thing about 2020, and they were worse. But really, like, with Brian Dable's offense and how he is a competent mind, and especially you include Kafka in here too, two competent offensive minds with a better improved offensive line. We'll see what the health of the wide receiver room looks like. But producing explosive plays on offense, stopping explosive plays on defense. That's the name of the game in the NFL. And if the Giants can be slightly better, especially offensively, they should be able to win 5-6 games this year.
And I'll even go a step further when we talk about the more plays you run is the more exposure you get in giving up what your strategy is, right? Here is the sample size. We're using everything we have for 15 plays to make it down to the red zone. Well, by the time you get to the third drive of the game, how much more quality plays do you have left to go to, right? So there is some exposure there from the opposition and being able to say, looks like that one picked them up. That picked them up good yardage from their own 25 to the 35. Let's keep an eye on that as they get in towards our end zone. I'm going to save, hopefully we can get on and do this again because it's been absolutely fantastic. And we can't thank Justin enough for making some time and having, I think, a great conversation. We hope everyone's enjoying it. But quickly before we get out the door here, the two players that obviously are on the front of Giants fans' minds, James Bradberry, that's the money. We talk about how are we going to pay everybody. He's the money. Is that still a matter of when, not if he gets traded, and just about the Giants accepting whatever the value market is going to be, waiting through some of the first rounds of the draft to see who doesn't get their guy? And then the follow-up is Saquon Barkley. Just are we done speculating he's 100% a part of this roster going into this season? Or is there still an opportunity where, again, draft day, teams are knocking and questions are being asked? Because Joe Schoen said, I'm not making calls. But he didn't say I'm not taking calls. And Joe Schoen has done a really good job of saying all the right things. Brian Dable said we're clear communicators. We immediately talk to Saquon. We talk to everybody. We're being upfront with every single player. That can include calling Saquon Barkley and saying, we're being upfront with you. There's a really good trade offer. You're going to be moved.
Yeah. Bradberry first. I do think it's not if, but when. Either he's going to be traded or he's going to be cut. I really hope, and this is what I think is going to happen, I think it's going to be one of those scenarios where we swap picks and Bradberry, where it's like, hey, you take 67 and the Bill, you know, what's funny, the Bills need a cornerback. So, and I think they have a pick in like the mid 50s. Hey, you know, you take pick 81 and James Bradberry, and we'll take like pick 55, like whatever pick they have in the 50s. And that's what I think it's going to wind up being. And I think I'll be okay with that, especially if it's moving up a decent amount and blah, blah, blah. I don't think the return is going to be fantastic. If it's better than cutting him, I will take that.
Still getting the money, right? I mean, that's what matters here.
Yeah. And they may even stretch it as long as training camp, which I would hate that for him personally, just because, hey, you know, it's training camp, and now you're going to have to move to an entire new city, but it's just kind of the business. It may be training camp. Somebody goes down with a torn ACL, and then boom, James Bradberry's on a new team. So they could stretch it that long, and I think they're willing to stretch it that long. Whereas I feel like the previous regime would get very impatient, panic, and then do something. But they're willing to play the long game with it, which I kind of like that approach. But I won't like it if they wind up cutting him. Saquon Barkley. It's one of those situations of
I like it until I don't like it.
Correct, exactly. Which, hey, maybe a cop out, but I hope it makes sense. Saquon Barkley, man, you're almost asking a wrong person, because I'm so done, man. I'm
asking the right person, because I've been done with Saquon Barkley going back to last year.
Here we go.
And this is what I've battled with Andy on the head and the heart version of being a Giants fan. It's not about the talent. It's not about the player or the person. It's just about where you are on your timeline. And if everyone agrees it was a mistake to take him at the second overall pick, and it was a mistake back then, and it's going to be a mistake to pay him next year, which is something there's no way that you could think a well-run organization like we think it is under Joe Schoen is going to do, then why is he here? You got to get pretty far back in terms of a draft asset return that I don't still say, yes, it's money, and it's moving on from some of the last remnants of the previous regime.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was about to say I was done with Saquon since 2018, and that's again, it's nothing personal to him. And I got on board, 2019 and 2020, coming in with, hey, what can Jason Garrett do? Maybe, what can Joe Judge do? Maybe, hey, 2019 sprained ankle, but he came back and he played well. What can happen? So I'm not. I wasn't just bitter for years and I hated him, but it's always just in the back of your mind that this just, it was not the right thing to do. There could have been other decisions that the Giants would have made at pick 2, and it also would have been the wrong decision, but it still, in my opinion, wouldn't have been as bad as taking a right. And that's my opinion. It's my opinion. But I think honestly at this point you're almost arguing about 2018 pick 2. About which pig looks prettiest with lipstick on, if you're talking about what player, besides Quentin Nelson.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, well, but Justin, see, hear me out on this one.
Yeah,
no, hold on, Andy, don't go down this road just yet. I want to get so what do you think happens with Saquon Barkley? Is he on the roster, or do you think the Giants are going to move him ahead of, during, or even post draft, whatever it looks like? Are they going to move him before the season starts, or, and I'll add it in, hold him until potentially for the trade deadline, which I think is the worst decision to make, potentially around injuries, obviously, and whether or not he's healthy enough to be moved?
Yeah, I go back and forth between brain heart. Can I answer it in brain heart? Brain says he's here. Heart and what I want says it makes more sense to move Saquon Barkley than it does James Bradberry. You're not eating any dead cap if you trade Saquon Barkley. You're not eating any dead cap. You are freeing $7 million, which that is the most financially responsible move, not just for right now, but also for the future if you trade Saquon Barkley. Because trading Saquon Barkley, to me, isn't just about freeing the $7 million. It's not just about, hey, can we get a fourth rounder back, fifth rounder back? It's about ensuring that you will not be making the irresponsible decision to give him that contract extension. That's the main win for me. It's the main win, because even though I have trust in Joe Schoen, I believe in Joe Schoen that he wouldn't do that to begin with, there's still that part of me in the back of my brain that's like, well, there's John Mara meddling. There's, these people, they're in the building. They have in touch with the emotion side of things, with players, locker room. All these things have to go in effect, and it's not just us sitting here what we want. So there's still that worry in the back of my brain that's like, well, maybe they have a plan of, even if it's like a pay cut for a running back, right? For a top running back, because is Saquon Barkley even a top running back anymore? This year will be a big teller of that. Is he even a top running back anymore? I don't know. I can't tell you that. So I'll
let him, by the way, man, you're literally, lockstep on this, including, I'll let Andy, you get your closing question in, but same thing about Bradberry. I've said this all off season, Andy. There's the world where I'm okay keeping James Bradberry if it doesn't look like it's going to work out in the right direction. I'll go into the season with him because, to your point, no matter what, you're going to take a money hit on this transaction. Mm-hmm. And even if he's not, as we say, he's not a fit for Wink Martindale's system. Okay. He's still a veteran quarterback who knows how to play football. Like, there's a difference between saying this guy's incapable of playing anymore versus he just isn't the ideal fit. So I think that he's the guy I keep saying, even though I think he will go before Saquon Barkley does, he's the guy that I think you could actually still maintain value out of. Whereas, man, listen, we know what the stats are on Barkley. And the worst case scenario is that he has a really good year. And then you fall into that scenario of, well, he's back on track. Now you almost have to pay him. How could you possibly let him go? And guys like Kafka or Dable could even be advocating for that, knowing how valuable he could be. Closing thoughts, Andy. Last question. Cigars. How is that where we're going?
Oh, is that what you wanted to do? You wanted to go back to the cigars? You guys steamroll me here on the Saquon Barkley piece, and you
once you see two people that are right, and one guy's going to be wrong, it just makes a lot of sense to plow through.
Stuff me over in the corner while you guys bash our beloved number 2 gold jacket wearing running back. It's just unbelievable what happens here. My little side note on the Saquon thing is, I do believe that the Giants are going to keep him. I think his trade value has never been lower than it is right now. We're talking about 4th or 5th round pick. The Giants could get so much more value for him if he goes into the season and starts playing well. The Giants could get more draft capital. And what's the worst case scenario? He plays well and you franchise him when you have a ton of cap space next year and you hold on to him for $12 million for one more year and then you let him go, right? Like I think that you guys want to cut bait with him. a little too early, but that's where I'm the heart guy in terms of I want to keep him around. The one other piece is, do you think that keeping Saquon Barkley around gives you a better understanding of what you have in Daniel Jones? Because my argument to Adam is that I do think Daniel Jones can still be a starting quarterback in this league. And if we just keep saying, let's remove assets and weapons from him, that it's not going to be like the best case of what we want to show with Daniel Jones. And it goes to the offensive tackle. We're talking about addressing the offensive line because our quarterback has been getting destroyed for a few years now. So for me, do you think Saquon Barkley has any impact on whether or not you could find out what you have in Daniel Jones?
Sorry, Justin. I'm sorry he's making you answer this question.
No, it's a good question, and it's one that a lot of people do believe that Saquon Barkley does have a lot of impact and determination on, evaluating Daniel Jones. I don't see it that way. I see it as number one scheme and play caller, as the number one determinant. That's not a word. Number one way to evaluate Daniel Jones. Number two, Andrew Thomas. Number three, can the wide receivers stay healthy? And also I put there's a lot of things that I put ahead of Saquon Barkley. Now, you don't want any scrubs at running back. Like if we're coming day one with Matt Breida and a 5th round pick as our two running backs, then hey, maybe that's a little bit of a concern. But I think the Giants are a little bit hell-bent, even if Saquon Barkley's here, which that's the kind of wild thing. Yeah. I think they're a little hell-bent on spending 81 or 112 on a running back. Like they love James Cook. They've met with him a couple times. And, that's something that's in the back of the brain too, where we're getting to later day two. And if a running back's taken when there's a lot of other players on the board that are like, this is a fun, exciting player, that may be something that Giants fans may not be too excited about. Number one, even people that want Saquon Barkley maybe don't view running back as that taken that high as much of a need right now. And then especially if you're a defender of Saquon Barkley, you're like, well, why are we taking this guy? It means that Saquon's gone. So there's a lot of other things that I put ahead of Saquon Barkley in terms of important things that Daniel Jones needs to be successful.
Hard pressed to see the Giants drafting Cook. I'm not saying they won't draft Cook, but drafting him and then still having Saquon Barkley. Like that would be more confounding to me, given how talented he could be. I happen to be a big fan of Matt Breida. I think that he has a lot of value. And I said it when they signed him. I was like, take it however you want. I thought that was indicative of the direction they want to move when it comes to the decision they're trying to make on Saquon Barkley, combined with what they can do in the draft. So
Adam loves backup running backs. He was very excited about Booker.
Running backs. I just
now
don't over-evaluate the talent of a running back position. There's too many examples around the league where running backs are interchangeable parts. And when you look around, I mean, go back and look, who was the guy that you were disgusted with the Giants signing on a 2-year contract last year? Ended up averaging more yards per carry than Saquon Barkley. Like, there's just a reality when you're rebuilding an offensive line, when you're rebuilding a system and a team, all you really want is the guy that gets you the consistent chunks of yards. The home run hitters are something that you need when everything around them is in place. Saquon Barkley's been diminished by the lack of talent on the team. Everybody knows that. But at some point, you have to accept that and move on from it, as we will do here with this, because we ran longer than we wanted to with Justin. Not longer than we wanted to. We just ran long because there was a lot of good conversation to have. Justin Penik, obviously, of Talking Giants. Anywhere that you want to highlight for people to find you? I know coming out of that cigar session on Twitter that you guys are over on YouTube now, right? Really diving in, getting that launched, and that's going to be an exciting spot for everyone to find you guys. Yeah,
so obviously Talking Giants is everywhere, including YouTube, but Talking Football. And yes. Our Jomboy Media football coverage is a place that I really want everybody to check out, especially before the draft. Bobby Skinner's been doing a great job banging out those breakdowns, and I edit those breakdowns for him. So there's about, I want to say probably around 20, maybe a little bit over 20 of different breakdowns. There's some matchup breakdowns too. So you get 2 players in one, like Trayvon Walker, Evan Neal, Roger McCreary, Jahan Dotson, some of those breakdowns. And I think he's even doing today a Dylan Parham versus Logan Hall breakdown too. So check out Talking Football, all the draft breakdowns, breaking down with the all 22 film and voiceovers and stuff like that. So that's like where we're headed next. Talking Giants, we're doing a good job with it, but where we want to head to next is we want to take over all football content as well. So I appreciate it if you check that out.
Woo. God, Justin, watch out. Justin's coming for you. They're coming for the league at large. We appreciate your time, Justin. As always, guys, you can follow us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, the like button, all that good stuff. Get us at One Giant Podcast on social media. And as Andy Mackiewicz always wants, needs, and demands the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.